Welcome, class. This is Dr. Lindner, and what we're going to be covering in this series is neurology. So let's take a look at neurology. We'll take a look at the neural system. And when you hear me talk about the nervous system, I typically relate to it as the neural system, but it's the same thing. I'm just very careful with the words that I choose. I don't like to use the word nervous very often. I don't want my students to be nervous. I think, neural has a better connotation to it. So what we're looking at here is the neural system, and we can see that it is broken up into a CNS and a PNS. So the CNS stands for the central neural system. When we look at the CNS stands for the central neural system, and the P in the PNS stands for peripheral, the peripheral neural system. Now, the central neural system, the CNS, is composed of the brain and the spinal cord. So what you see in the center is the central neural system. What is it made up of? Two things and two things only, the brain and the spinal cord. That is it. Anything outside of that, whether they be nerves that come off of the brain, which are called cranial nerves, whether they're nerves that come off the spine, those are called spinal nerves, or whether they are these little swollen nodules that we see outside of the spinal cord, those are called ganglia. These refer to the peripheral neural system. Now, messages can come from the periphery. They can come from out here. They can come into the spinal cord, and then they can go up. See if I can get this. They can go up the spinal cord. I'm not sure why my pen isn't working. Let's see. You can have information coming in and coming up into the brain. Okay. So when you have information that starts out here and comes up and into the brain, when you have information that starts in the periphery and comes up and ends in the brain, that information that's moving upward, that we can say is ascending, which is going up. We also can say it's afferent, and sensory. They all mean the same thing. So sensory information is afferent information, and it's ascending because it goes up. Now, we can have information that starts at the brain, goes down the spinal cord, and then goes out. So starts in the brain, goes down the spinal cord, and then goes out to maybe your muscles or goes out to your organs. That information is called motor information. Motor. It is also called descending. And it's also called efferent. Not afferent, but efferent information. So the neural system can receive information. It could take sensory input that ascends like an up elevator and ends somewhere in the brain, or you can have information that starts in the brain, goes down the elevator out to different body parts. Okay, and that's called motor information. So there's sensory that comes in and motor that goes out. Okay, And the way that happens is if we look at a cross section of the spinal cord, you'll see that in red are motor tracks, which are descending, and the blue ones are sensory tracks, which, think of the sensory tracks, that's the up elevator going up to the brain, and the motors, the descending tracks, that's the downward elevator. So we have upward and downward elevators carrying sensory and motor information. Those are called and referred to as tracks. We have sensory tracks and motor tracks that go up and down the spinal cord. Okay, and each of them have different names, and you have them on both sides. I know this picture shows, only the sensory tracks on the right side and the motor tracks on the left, but you have these motor tracks also on this side, and you have the sensory tracks also on this side. They just divided them so it's easier for the eyes to see. Okay. So the central neural system, remember, is composed of what? Just the brain and the spinal cord. That's it, brain and spinal cord. What is the peripheral neural system? That is pretty much everything other than the brain and spinal cord. It's cranial nerves, it's spinal nerves. Okay, it's everything outside of that. Now, when we look at another view of this, let's take a look and see that we have sensory information coming into the central neural system, and then we have motor output coming out of it. So the sensory division, we have somatic senses and we have special senses. Somatic senses, these are like your organs, okay? Your muscles, your soma, that means your body. So we have your muscles, your joints, okay? You have organs. They're going to be sending information into the brain and the spinal cord. And your special senses would be like your eyes, your ears, your nose, all of the things that are special senses. That too sends information into the brain and spinal cord. When it processes that information, it's going to send out a motor command, and the motor command is going to go to the somatic neural system and the autonomic neural system. The somatic is voluntary, it's consciously controlled. It's going to send out neurological output to your skeletal muscles so that you can move all of your joints. You have conscious voluntary control over that. The other branch of the motor output is the ANS. It's typically referred to as the autonomic neural system, the ANS. And the word autonomic looks like automatic, doesn't it? Sounds like the word automatic. So automatic, in terms of automatic, it's going to automatically send that information to the sympathetics and your parasympathetics. And I'm going to go over what the sympathetics and what the parasympathetics are. But simply put, they're both going to go to smooth muscles. They're both going to go to smooth muscles, your heart, and your glands. And sympathetically, for the most part, when we think of sympathetics, for the most part, we're going to think primarily accelerator. And when we think of parasympathetics, we're going to think the brake. So we put a positive sign and then negative sign for the most part. For the most part, sympathetics are going to speed things up and the parasympathetic will slow things down. Okay. Now, when we look at the somatic neural system, that's voluntary. When we look at the autonomic, that's involuntary. Somatic, soma, this is going to be carrying neurons from the cutaneous, like from your skin, and your special sensory receptors to the brain and the spinal cord. And then your motor neurons are going to go out to your skeletal muscle to control and to move your body consciously and voluntarily. Whereas the autonomic neural system, on the other hand, this one is going to be the sensory neurons from the viscera organs to the central neural system. And the motor is going to be, or the motor neurons, smooth muscle, cardiac muscle, and your glands. Now, the two main divisions are going to be your sympathetic and parasympathetic. Your sympathetic is also known as the thoracolumbar outflow because it goes from T1 to L2. So thoracolumbar, T is for thoracic, L is for lumbar, thoracolumbar output, also known as the fight or flight response. Fight or flight response, we know if you're being chased by something, well, what's going to happen to your heart rate? It's going to speed up. What's going to happen to your breathing and your respiration? It's going to speed up. But what's going to happen to your digestion? If you're in fight or flight response, we don't want blood in our digestive tract breaking down food. We want the blood going to all our muscles so we can get out of danger's way. So the sympathetic speeds everything up, but the exception to that will be digestion. Whereas parasympathetic, which is we think of as the brake, because it slows down the heart rate, it slows down your breathing, but the only thing that it speeds up is digestion. Parasympathetic is known as feed and breed, or rest and digest. So rest and digest, well, if we're digesting, we want the parasympathetics turning on the digestive tract to help break down the food properly. The sympathetic was known as the thoracolumbar output. The parasympathetic is called the craniosacral output because there are cranial nerves and sacral nerves. So it's craniosacral. The cranial nerves are cranial nerves 3, which is the oculomotor, cranial nerve 7, which is the facial nerve, cranial nerve 9, which is the glossopharyngeal nerve, and cranial nerve 10, which is the vagal nerve. And the vagal nerve makes up around 80 to 90% of the parasympathetic output. That one cranial nerve, the vagal nerve. It gets its name from the word vagrant, meaning a wanderer. So that's the cranial division, 3, 7, 9, and 10. And the sacral division is sacral segments S2, S3, and S4. Okay? All right, we'll take a break here. When we come back, we'll talk about the neuron.